Commander Tylus Vorin stood at the observation window of his orbital station and watched his world die. Below him, the beautiful crystal cities of Varath Prime burned with orange and black fire. The smoke rose so high that he could see it from space, spreading across the continents like a disease. 17 days. That was all it took for the Kazreth Dominion to destroy everything his people had built over 10,000 years. The Kazreth were monsters. There was no other word for them. They stood 8 feet tall, covered in black armor that grew from their own bodies. They had claws that could cut through metal and teeth that could crush bone. They moved like insects, thought like insects, and killed like insects. For 2,000 years, they had traveled across the galaxy, consuming one civilization after another. No one had ever stopped them. Now they had come for Varath Prime. Tylus turned away from the window and looked at the tactical display. The blue dots that represented his fleet were almost gone. Only 12% remained. The red dots that represented the enemy covered the screen like a bloody stain. 400 warships circled his world, and millions of soldiers crawled across its surface. "Commander," said his aide, a young officer named Saris. Her voice was steady, but Tylus could see the fear in her eyes. "The Citadel of Resonance reports that the enemy will reach them in 72 hours. There are 4 billion civilians sheltering there." 4 billion. Tylus closed his eyes. The Citadel was their most sacred place, built by their ancestors before they had learned to travel between stars. It was also their last refuge. If it fell, his species would end. "What about the Galactic Council?" he asked. "Have they responded?" Saris was quiet for a moment. "Yes, Commander. They have officially declared the war concluded in all but formality. They say that sending help would be a waste of resources." Tylus felt something cold settle in his chest. The Council had abandoned them. The neighboring civilizations were already talking to the Kazreth, trying to save themselves. No one was coming. No one cared. He walked to the communications console and began recording a message. He did not know who would hear it. Perhaps no one. But he had to try. "This is Commander Tylus Vorin of the Varathi Collective," he said. His voice was calm, even though his hearts were breaking. "Our world is dying. Our people are dying. The Kazreth have come, and we cannot stop them. The galaxy has turned away from us. We understand. We do not blame anyone. We only ask that someone, somewhere, remembers that we existed. Remember that we tried. Remember that we loved our children and our home and our future. Remember us." He ended the recording and sent it out on every frequency. Then he sat down in his command chair and waited for the end. For 3 hours, nothing happened. The Kazreth continued their advance. More cities fell. More people died. Tylus watched the numbers climb and felt himself going numb. Then his communications officer sat up straight. "Commander, we are receiving a transmission." Tylus did not hope. He had no hope left. "From who?" "Unknown. The ship design does not match anything in our database. The transmission frequency is strange. We have never seen anything like it." "Play it." The speakers crackled. Then a voice came through, speaking a language that the computer quickly translated. It was a harsh voice, rough and direct, with no elegance or ceremony. "This is the Terran Expeditionary Force, 77th Combined Arms Division. We heard you. Hold the line. We are coming." Tylus stared at the speaker. "Terran? What is a Terran?" His officers checked their databases. Nothing. No species called Terran. No record of any 77th Combined Arms Division. No information at all. "Commander," said Saris slowly, "I found something. There is one brief mention in the exploration archives. A small planet in a distant spiral arm. Primitive technology, barely capable of interstellar travel. The species called themselves humans. They were considered insignificant." "Insignificant," Tylus repeated. He looked at the tactical display, at the hundreds of enemy ships, at the millions of enemy soldiers. And they are coming to help us? It appears so, Commander. Tylus did not understand. His people were strangers to these humans. They had never traded with them, never spoken to them, never even known they existed. Why would anyone come to die for strangers? He opened a return channel. Terran vessel, this is Commander Tylus Vorin. We are grateful for your words, but you do not understand what you are facing. The Kazreth have 400 warships and millions of ground troops. They have never been defeated. If you come here, you will die with us. There was a pause. Then the voice came back, and Tylus thought he could hear something like a smile in it. Commander, we know exactly what we are facing. We have studied the Kazreth. We know their numbers, their tactics, their capabilities. We know that every mathematical model says this fight cannot be won. We know that the smart thing to do is stay away and let your world fall. Another pause. We are not smart. We are stubborn. There is a difference. Hold the line. We will be there in 36 hours. The transmission ended. Tylus sat in silence. Around him, his officers exchanged confused looks. None of them understood what was happening. Neither did Tylus. But for the first time in 17 days, he felt something strange and unfamiliar in his chest. It took him a moment to recognize it. It was hope. Send a message to the Citadel, he said slowly. Tell them that help is coming. Tell them to hold the line. Commander, said Saris carefully, we do not know anything about these humans. We do not know how many ships they have, or how strong they are, or if they can truly help us. This could be a false hope. I know, said Tylus, but false hope is still hope, and right now, hope is all we have. He turned back to the observation window and looked down at his burning world. Somewhere out there, strangers were racing toward them. Strangers who had heard a dying planet's cry for help, and had answered without hesitation. He did not know who these humans were. He did not know what they could do, but he knew one thing with absolute certainty. They were coming. Against all logic, against all reason, against all hope, they were coming. And that, somehow, made all the difference. Tylus straightened his back and squared his shoulders. His people had been waiting for someone to save them. Perhaps these humans would, perhaps they would not. But either way, the Varathi would not go quietly. They would fight, they would resist, they would hold the line. Until the very end, they would hold the line. 36 hours later, the humans came. Tylus watched from his command station as 12 ships dropped out of hyperspace. 12 ships. He counted them twice to make sure. 12 small vessels, barely cruiser class, against 400 Kazreth warships. His heart sank. This was not a rescue. This was a suicide. The Kazreth Hive Admiral clearly agreed. Tylus intercepted the enemy transmission, a single dismissive command broadcast to the entire swarm. Devour them. 100 Kazreth ships broke formation and moved toward the human vessels. They did not rush. They did not need to. This would be over quickly. Then the human ships began to move. Tylus leaned forward. Something was wrong. The human ships were not moving like any spacecraft he had ever seen. They were too fast. They turned too sharply. They accelerated at speeds that should have killed everyone inside. How is that possible? Whispered Saris. No living creature can survive those forces. The humans did not seem to care what was possible. They danced through the Kazreth formation like sparks through smoke. And then they began to fire. Tylus had expected energy weapons. Every civilized species used energy weapons. They were clean, precise, and elegant. What the humans used was none of these things. They fired chunks of metal, simple, solid projectiles accelerated to impossible speeds by magnetic rails. The galaxy had abandoned such primitive weapons thousands of years ago. The Kazreth discovered why that was a mistake. The projectiles punched through bioship hulls like needles through paper. They did not burn or vaporize, they simply destroyed. One Kazreth vessel after another broke apart, spilling bodies and debris into the void. Tylus watched in stunned silence as 12 human ships engaged 100 Kazreth vessels and did not retreat. The lead ship, which the humans called the Perseverance, lost half its hull in the first exchange. But it kept fighting. A voice came over the open channel. "Human, calm. This is Colonel Marcus Chen. Redirect power from life support to forward guns. We will breathe when they are dead." Life support. They were shutting down their own life support to get more power for their weapons. They were choosing to suffocate so they could kill more enemies before they died. Tylus did not understand these creatures. While the battle raged in space, something else was happening in orbit. Small objects were falling toward the planet, thousands of them. Tylus focused his sensors and saw that they were pods, metal coffins, barely large enough to hold a single body, plummeting through the atmosphere at terminal velocity. "They are making an orbital drop," said Ceres. Her voice was filled with horror. "Directly into the atmosphere, without ships. Commander, the stress alone should kill them." "The heat should kill them," agreed Tylus. "The impact should kill them. Everything about this should kill them." The pods hit the ground. They did not land near the Kazrith forces, or behind them, or around them. They landed directly in the middle of the siege lines surrounding the citadel. 30,000 human soldiers dropped from the sky and landed in the heart of the enemy army. Tylus switched to ground sensors and watched the first contact between humans and Kazrith. The Kazrith warriors were 8 feet tall. They had claws that could cut through armor, and strength that could crush vehicles. They had never lost a ground battle in 2,000 years of conquest. They outnumbered the humans 1,000 to 1. The humans did not seem to notice. They came out of their pods firing. Their weapons were loud and brutal, spitting fire and metal. They moved forward, always forward, stepping over the bodies of the fallen to reach the next enemy. When they ran out of ammunition, they used blades. When their blades broke, they used their hands. When they could no longer stand, they crawled. Tylus watched a human soldier take a Kazrith claw through her stomach. She should have died. Instead, she grabbed the Kazrith's arm, held it in place, and shot the creature in the head with her other hand. Then she kept fighting for another 3 minutes before her body finally gave out. He watched a group of soldiers get surrounded by 100 Kazrith. They formed a circle, back to back, and fought until there was only one left. That one kept fighting for another 10 minutes. He watched a human medic run into the middle of a firefight to drag a wounded soldier to safety. The medic was shot 6 times. He got the soldier to cover, treated her wounds, and then collapsed. The Kazrith did not understand what they were facing. Their warriors were used to enemies who retreated when injured, who surrendered when surrounded, who broke when their lines were breached. The humans did none of these things. They did not retreat. They did not surrender. They did not break. A Kazrith warrior drone sent a chemical signal back to the Hive Admiral. It was the last thing the drone did before a human soldier killed it with a knife. The signal was a single concept, a warning encoded in the ancient language of the swarm. Translated, it meant, "These creatures are broken. They do not know when to die." By the end of the first hour, the human landing zone was a nightmare of blood and fire and screaming. 3,000 humans were dead, but the line held. The siege had been broken in one critical sector. The citadel was still standing. Colonel Chen's voice came over the communication channel again. He was breathing hard. and Tylus could hear gunfire in the background. "Commander Tylus, we have established a defensive perimeter. The enemy is regrouping. We estimate we can hold for 72 hours, maybe more. Is that enough time for you to organize your remaining forces?" Tylus found his voice. "Colonel Chen, you have 30,000 soldiers against millions. You cannot win this battle." There was a pause. When Chen spoke again, his voice was almost amused. "Commander, you misunderstand us. We did not come here to win. We came here to hold. Winning can come later. For now, we just need to not lose. There is a difference." More gunfire. "Now, if you will excuse me, I have a war to fight." Chen out. The channel closed. Tylus sat in his chair and tried to process what he was witnessing. These humans, these strange and terrible creatures, had crossed the galaxy to fight an impossible battle. They had known they would die. They had known they could not win, and they had come anyway. He thought about Chen's words. "We did not come here to win. We came here to hold." For the first time, Tylus began to believe that his people might survive. Not because the humans would save them, but because the humans had shown them something they had forgotten. It was possible to face certain death and still refuse to surrender. It was possible to fight, not because you could win, but because giving up was worse than dying. The Varathi had lost hope. The humans had brought it back. Now it was time for the Varathi to remember how to fight. 3 days into the battle, Commander Tylus made a decision that surprised everyone, including himself. He took a shuttle down to the surface and joined the human forces on the ground. He needed to understand them. He needed to see what they were with his own eyes. Colonel Chen met him at the landing zone. The human looked exhausted. His uniform was torn and stained with blood, some of it his own. But his eyes were sharp and alert, and he stood straight, despite his obvious fatigue. "Commander," he said, extending his hand. Tylus had learned that this was a human greeting. He took the hand and shook it. "Welcome to hell." The defensive line was a nightmare. The humans had built walls from rubble and wreckage. They had dug trenches in the crystal soil. They had set up gun positions on every piece of high ground. And beyond the walls, the Khazrith waited, a sea of black armor and gleaming claws. Tylus walked among the human soldiers and tried to understand them. He found Sergeant Elena Vasquez at a mountain pass. She commanded 200 soldiers who had been holding the position for 2 days straight. They had not slept. They had barely eaten. Their ammunition was running low, but they were still fighting. A young soldier, barely more than a child by human standards, approached Vasquez. His hands were shaking. "Sergeant," he said quietly, "are we going to die here?" Vasquez looked at him for a long moment. Then she put her hand on his shoulder. "Probably," she said. Her voice was gentle but honest. "But we are going to make them remember the price." The young soldier nodded slowly. Then he went back to his position, picked up his weapon, and waited for the next attack. Tylus did not understand. "Why does he not despair?" he asked Vasquez. "You told him he would die." Vasquez smiled, though there was no joy in it. Because dying is not the worst thing that can happen to a human. Giving up is worse. Letting others die when you could have fought is worse. He knows that if he runs, he might live a few more hours. But he also knows that he could never live with himself. So he stays. We all stay. The next attack came an hour later. The Khazrith poured through the pass in waves. Vasquez's soldiers met them with fire and steel. Tylus watched humans die. He watched them take wounds that should have been fatal and keep fighting. He watched them drag wounded friends to safety while under fire. And he watched something else. Between attacks, when there was a moment of quiet, the soldiers sat together and talked. They told stories. They laughed. One group sang a song together, Crude words set to a simple tune. It was not a song of mourning or fear. It was a song of defiance. Tylus found Colonel Chen at the command post. The colonel was reviewing tactical data, while a medic bandaged a wound on his arm. He did not seem to notice the pain. "I do not understand your species," Tylus said. "You know you cannot win. The mathematics are clear. You are outnumbered 1,000 to 1. Every analysis says you should retreat, preserve your forces, wait for a better opportunity. Why do you stay and die?" Chen was quiet for a moment. Then he set down his datapad and looked at Tylus directly. "Commander, humanity spent 10,000 years fighting itself. War after war after war. We became very, very good at not giving up. We learned that sometimes the battle you cannot win is the battle you must fight anyway. Because if you do not fight, something worse than death happens. You lose who you are." He gestured at the soldiers around them. "These men and women did not come here because they thought they could win. They came because you asked for help, and no one else answered. That was enough. That will always be enough." "But why?" Tylus pressed. "We are strangers. We have never done anything for you. Why would you die for people you do not know?" Chen's expression changed. For a moment, Tylus saw something ancient and fierce in his eyes. "Because that is what humans do. We protect the weak. We fight for the helpless. Not because we will gain anything. Not because we expect thanks. Because it is right. Because someone has to. Because if we do not, then what are we?" A communication came through. The Khazreth were massing for their largest assault yet. The Hive Admiral had committed 60% of all planetary forces to crush the human position. This was the end. There was no way to survive such an attack. Chen smiled. Tylus stared at him. "Why are you smiling? This is death coming for us." "Yes," said Chen, "but they just made a mistake. A very big mistake." "What mistake?" "They will overwhelm us." Chen's smile widened. "Commander, look at where those forces are coming from. The Hive Admiral just pulled 60% of his army away from other positions to attack us here. He has committed everything to this assault." Tylus looked at the tactical display. He saw what Chen meant. The Khazreth had concentrated their forces. Their command ships were exposed. Their other positions were weakened. "Our ships," said Chen. "The ones the Khazreth think are crippled. They are not crippled. They were waiting." As he spoke, the orbital display changed. The 12 human ships that had been drifting, damaged and silent, suddenly came alive. Their engines flared. Their weapons powered up. In one coordinated strike, they hit the Khazreth command vessels with everything they had. The Hive Admiral's ship exploded. Then 2 more command ships. Then 4 more. In minutes, every Khazreth vessel with a hive mind connection was destroyed or disabled. On the ground, something strange happened. The Khazreth army, which had been moving with perfect coordination, suddenly stopped. Then it began to break apart. Soldiers turned on each other. Units scattered in random directions. The perfect war machine became chaos. "The Khazreth are a hive mind," said Chen. "They depend on their commanders for coordination. Without the Hive Admiral, they have no guidance. They become animals." Tylus watched the enemy army dissolve into confusion. For the first time in 17 days, the Khazreth were not advancing. They were not even fighting together. They were lost. "This was your plan," Tylus said slowly. "From the beginning. You let them think you were beaten. You let them commit their forces. And then you cut off their head." "We did not let them think anything," said Chen. "We really were beaten. We really were dying. The difference is that dying did not stop us from fighting. And as long as we were fighting, we could still win." He turned to face Tylus directly. "Commander, the battle is not over. We have broken their coordination, but they still outnumber us. Now is the time to push forward. Now is the time to finish this." Tylus looked at the tactical display. He looked at the scattered enemy. He looked at the human soldiers who were already preparing to advance. "Yes," he said, "now is the time." For the first time since the war began, Commander Tylus Vorin felt something other than fear. He felt anger. He felt determination. He felt the fire that humans seem to carry in their souls. Colonel Chen gave a single order to all human forces. "All units advance. No one stops until we reach the sea." The counteroffensive began at dawn. 30,000 humans had landed on Verith Prime. 18,000 remained alive. They faced an enemy that still numbered in the millions. But the Khazreth were broken. Their hive mind was gone. Their coordination was shattered. They were no longer an army. They were a mob. The humans pushed forward. Tylus watched from the command post as the human lines advanced. They did not walk. They did not march. They ran. They charged directly into enemy positions with weapons blazing. They climbed over obstacles. They broke through walls. They did not stop for anything. The Khazreth tried to resist. Individual warriors still fought with savage fury. Small groups formed defensive clusters. But without coordination, they could not respond to the human tactics. The humans would hit one position, then disappear and strike another. They moved too fast, adapted too quickly, thought too creatively. Sergeant Vasquez led her company toward a Khazreth spawning pit. Intelligence said that 50,000 larval warriors were growing inside. If they matured, the war would continue for months. They had to be destroyed. She started with 200 soldiers. By the time they reached the pit, she had 60 left. The fighting was brutal. The Khazreth guarding the pit were among the largest and most vicious warriors on the planet. They fought with the desperation of creatures protecting their young. Vasquez lost 10 soldiers in the first minute, 20 in the next, but she kept pushing forward. The final assault cost her everything. 40 soldiers went in. 3 came out. But the spawning pit burned behind them. Vasquez stood among the bodies of her fallen soldiers. Her uniform was torn. Her face was covered in blood. Her left arm hung useless at her side. But she was alive, and the mission was complete. One of the surviving soldiers found a torn piece of uniform cloth. He attached it to a broken weapon and planted it in the ground like a flag. "For them," he said quietly. Vasquez nodded. For them. Across the continent, similar battles raged. A tank battalion with only 3 working vehicles broke through a Khazreth fortress by driving directly through the walls. They treated the building as an obstacle, not a stronghold. The Khazreth had never seen anything like it. Human combat medics ran into the middle of firefights to save wounded Varathi civilians. One medic was shot 4 times while carrying an injured Varathi child to safety. She did not stop until the child was behind cover. Then she died. A Varathi soldier who witnessed this asked another human why the medic had sacrificed herself for a stranger. The human's answer was simple. She could not have lived with herself if she had not tried. Something changed in the Varathi that day. For centuries, they had been a peaceful people. They had never known war. When the Khazreth came, they had tried to fight, but they did not know how. They had accepted death because they did not know how to resist it. The humans showed them another way. Varathi civilians began to take up arms. Farmers used their industrial equipment as weapons. Scientists turned their laboratories into weapon factories. Teachers organized evacuation routes and supply lines. Everyone who could hold a weapon joined the fight. Commander Tylus led a Varathi counterattack alongside human forces. It was the first time Varathi soldiers had fought beside aliens. It would not be the last. At one point, a Khazreth champion emerged from the enemy lines. It was huge, twice the size of a normal warrior, covered in scars from 100 battles. It roared a challenge in the ancient Khazreth way, demanding single combat with the enemy leader. Tylus stepped forward. The champion looked at him with what might have been contempt. This small, soft creature dared to face a Kazreth champion? Tylus had learned something from the humans. He repeated a phrase he had heard Chen use. "We do not do fair fights." His soldiers opened fire. The champion fell in seconds. A human soldier laughed and slapped Tylus on the back. "Now you are thinking like us." The push continued for 48 hours. The humans did not sleep. The Varathi did not sleep. They pushed the Kazreth back kilometer by kilometer, sector by sector. The enemy that had seemed unstoppable just days ago now fled before them. But the cost was terrible. By the end of the second day, only 7,000 human soldiers remained standing. Thousands of Varathi had died beside them. The ground was covered with bodies from both sides. The crystal soil of Verath Prime was stained dark with blood. Colonel Chen stood at the edge of the last major battlefield. The Kazreth survivors were retreating toward their landing ships. They were running. For the first time in 2,000 years, the Kazreth Dominion was running from an enemy. Tylus joined him. Together, they watched the enemy flee. "We won," said Tylus. He could barely believe the words. "Yes," said Chen, "we won." "How?" Tylus asked. "The numbers said we could not win. Every calculation, every analysis, every prediction said we would fail. How did we win?" Chen was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was tired but certain. "Because numbers do not fight wars. People do. The Kazreth counted our ships and our soldiers and decided we were not a threat. They did not understand that humans do not care about the odds. We care about the fight. We care about the people we are fighting for. And we care about the people fighting beside us." A communication came through. The Kazreth were requesting permission to evacuate their remaining forces. They were willing to leave Verath Prime forever. They were willing to surrender the entire sector. They wanted only one thing: to get away from the humans. Chen looked at Tylus. "Your world, your choice." Tylus thought about the millions of Varathi who had died. He thought about the cities that had burned, the families that had been destroyed, the children who would never grow up. Part of him wanted to refuse. Part of him wanted to make the Kazreth pay for everything they had done. But he looked at the human soldiers around him. They were exhausted. They were wounded. They had given everything they had to save his people. Continuing the fight would cost more lives, human and Varathi alike. "Let them go," Tylus said. "The killing is done." Chen nodded. He opened a channel to the Kazreth. "This is Colonel Marcus Chen of the Terran Expeditionary Force. You have permission to evacuate. Leave this system and do not return. If you do, we will be here, and we will not be as merciful next time." The Kazreth did not argue. Their ships lifted off and fled into the darkness of space. Within hours, the last enemy had left Verath Prime. The war was over. Tylus stood among the ruins of his world and looked up at the sky. Somewhere beyond those stars, the Kazreth were running. They would tell others about what had happened here. They would tell them about the humans, and the galaxy would never be the same. He turned to Chen and extended his hand in the human fashion. "Thank you. You saved my people." Chen shook his hand. His grip was firm but gentle. "We did not save you. We helped you save yourselves. That is what matters." The survivors began the long work of burying their dead and rebuilding their world. Humans and Varathi worked side by side, just as they had fought side by side. Something new had been born in the fire of war, something that would change both species forever. The battle was won. The war was over, but the story was just beginning. 3 months after the Battle of Verath Prime, the galaxy was still trying to understand what had happened. The Kazreth Dominion had retreated to their home systems. For the first time in 2,000 years, they were not expanding. They were not conquering. They were hiding. The species that had terrorized 100 worlds was now afraid to leave its own borders. All because of one battle. All because of 30,000 soldiers. Commander Tylus stood at the center of the Citadel of Resonance and watched as workers put the finishing touches on the monument of the Unyielding. It was massive, a tower of crystal and steel that rose toward the sky. On its surface, carved in letters that would last forever, were the names of every human who had fallen in the defense of Verath Prime. 22,666 names. Tylus had memorized all of them. He felt he owed them that much. General Chen stood beside him. The humans had promoted him after the battle, recognizing his leadership. He looked older now, worn down by the weight of what he had seen and done. But his eyes were still sharp, and his back was still straight. "It is beautiful," said Chen, looking at the monument. "It is the least we can do," said Tylus. "Your people died for mine. We will never forget." Representatives from across the galaxy had come to Verath Prime. They wanted to study the battle, to understand how a tiny force had defeated an empire. They analyzed the tactics, the weapons, the logistics. They interviewed survivors. They examined every piece of data they could find. None of it explained what had really happened. The Galactic Council produced an official report on the battle. Most of it was public, full of military analysis and strategic recommendations. But there was a classified section, meant only for the leaders of major civilizations. Tylus had been given a copy, because his people had been at the center of events. He read it to Chen. "Human tactical doctrine is based on a psychological foundation we do not possess and cannot copy. They do not fight because they believe they will win. They fight because surrender is more unbearable than death. Any species engaging humanity in warfare should understand this. Mathematical superiority is meaningless. They will not stop. They cannot stop. This is not bravery. This is something older and more terrible. We recommend immediate diplomatic overtures and the formal recognition of Earth as a major power. Under no circumstances should humanity be provoked." Chen laughed, but there was no humor in it. "They make us sound like monsters." "Are you?" Tylus asked. It was not an accusation. It was a genuine question. Chen thought about it for a long time. "We are what we had to become to survive. Our world was not kind to us. We had to fight for everything. Every meal, every shelter, every moment of peace. We learned that giving up meant dying, that surrender meant extinction, so we stopped surrendering. We stopped giving up. And eventually, it became part of who we are." He looked at the monument. "We are not monsters. We are just stubborn. Very, very stubborn." A Verathi child approached them. She was young, maybe 10 years old by Verathi standards. She had been in the Citadel during the siege, one of the 4 billion civilians who had waited for death that never came. She looked up at Chen with wide, curious eyes. "Why did you come to save us?" Chen knelt down so he was at her level. His voice was gentle. "Because you asked, and no one else answered." The child's parents stood nearby, watching. She was a survivor of the siege, one of the people who had huddled in the Citadel while the world burned outside. "Would you do it again?" she asked. "Fight impossible odds? Die in thousands? For strangers?" Sergeant Vasquez stepped forward. She had survived the battle, though she would carry its scars forever. Her left arm was gone, replaced by a mechanical prosthetic. Her face was marked by burns and cuts that would never fully heal. But she was still a soldier, and she would always be a soldier. She answered the mother's question. Her voice was tired, scarred, but absolutely certain. Every single time. The mother's eyes filled with tears. She bowed her head to Vasquez, a gesture of deep respect among the Verathi. Vasquez nodded back, soldier to survivor. warrior to the person she had fought to protect. Across the galaxy, beings who had never met a human began to tell stories about them. They spoke of the Terrans who came from nowhere, who fought like demons, who held the line when every calculation said they could not. The stories spread from world to world, growing with each telling. Some of the stories were exaggerated, some were accurate. All of them captured the same essential truth. Humans were different. They did not fight like other species. They did not think like other species. They did not give up like other species. They were something new in the galaxy, something strange and terrifying and wonderful. The Kazreth, in their dark hive nests, added a new chemical marker to their species' memory. It was passed down to every new generation, a warning encoded in the ancient language of the swarm. Translated into words, it meant, "Beware the soft ones. They are not soft inside." On Earth, the news of the battle reached the public. People watched the footage, read the reports, learned the names of the fallen. Some cried, some cheered. All of them understood that something had changed. Humanity was no longer alone in the galaxy, and the galaxy now knew what humans were capable of. The 77th Combined Arms Division was given the highest honors Earth could offer. The survivors received medals and promotions. The dead received monuments and eternal remembrance. Their names would be taught in schools for generations to come. But for the soldiers themselves, the honors did not matter much. They had not fought for glory or recognition. They had fought because people needed help, and no one else was willing to give it. General Chen stood before the monument one last time before leaving Verith Prime. Sergeant Vasquez stood with him. They were two of the 7,334 who had walked off the battlefield alive. They carried the memories of everyone who had not. "Do you regret it?" Vasquez asked. "Coming here?" Chen shook his head slowly. "Not for a moment. This is what we are. This is what we do. We protect, we defend. We stand between the innocent and those who would harm them. If we ever stop doing that, we stop being human." He reached out and touched one of the names on the monument. Private James Wright, 19 years old, killed on the second day of the battle while protecting a group of Varathi children. "He was a good soldier," said Chen quietly. "They were all good soldiers," said Vasquez. They stood in silence for a long time, remembering the dead, honoring their sacrifice. Then they turned and walked away. There was still work to do. There would always be work to do. Somewhere in the galaxy, someone needed help, and when they called, humans would answer. That was the lesson of the Battle of Verith Prime. That was what the galaxy learned about humanity. When the darkness came, when hope died, when everyone else turned away, humans would stand and fight. Not because they were brave, not because they were strong, but because they could not bear to do anything else. The outcome had been sealed. The mathematics had been certain. The war had been lost. Until unyielding human soldiers entered the fight. And everything changed.